to talk about threats and how to manage those threats and make sure you feel secure, but you also are secure. That relationship with the St. Louis County Police Department is important because if the annexation goes through in the vote tomorrow, then the large area that is targeted for annexation by the city of Manchester on the south side of Manchester Road, if that area is annexed, you will lose St. Louis County police coverage. And you will lose your very close relationship with the county police department. That's important for a couple of reasons. One is that St. Louis County Police Department is the most sophisticated police agency in this region, in this state, and you already enjoy a close relationship. Second is that you also have a very close relationship with me because I am close personal friends with many people here tonight and many people in the Muslim community. And at any point along the way, you need some extra attention, then I'm a phone call away, and there's probably half a dozen people here in the room that can call me and have called me on my cell phone when they need something. So I'm here tonight to express to you that we enjoy having you all in St. Louis County. This mosque is currently in unincorporated St. Louis County and is not threatened by the annexation vote tomorrow, but a large area south of Manchester, where a lot of your members live, is. And if this annexation passes tomorrow, then they will lose the close relationship they have with the county police department, in addition to having to put up with large tax increases, which is part of this proposal. That's all I wanted to do tonight, is come and say thank you for our 20-year relationship and ask you again to consider a no vote on that annexation tomorrow. If you live in that area, tell your friends, because we would like to keep our close relationship with the county police department for that area. And your safety and your security is very important to me personally, not only because many of you are my friends, but it's the right thing to do and it's a responsibility of the St. Louis County Police Department. And because of our conversations, you should see a few extra patrols on Weedman Road in the past couple of weeks and in the coming weeks. And thanks for letting me be here tonight.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, we have reached and concluded the battle of Al-Ahzab, the battle of the Confederates, or the battle of the trench, Al-Khandaq. In several different 4 or 5 segments, we covered the entirety of the battle, alhamdulillah. And after, there's some things that we're discussing after the battle, the aftermath, if you'd like. And we had discussed the tribe of Banu Qurayza. And if you remember the betrayal of the tribe of Banu Qurayza and how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with them. After the Banu Qurayza are dealt with, there are some small incidents within the seerah that we'll cover in this next few months that we have until the battle of Khaybar. So there's miscellaneous incidents, but they're very interesting. They have a lot of benefits in them, a lot of different lessons that we can derive. But one of the things that's almost linked to the battle of Al-Khandaq, or the battle of the trench, because of him being injured, is the passing of Sa'ad ibn Muadh radiyallahu anh. And it's linked here especially because after the Prophet ﷺ had dealt with the tribe of Banu Qurayza, Sa'ad's death is one of the first things that the Muslims would face. Now, there's a few different ways to look at the seerah, right? The way that we're doing it is from the perspective of the Prophet ﷺ. But I wanted to, initially I thought that there's more that we could cover, but what I noticed is that no companion's death has more reaction, more emotion, and more reports that we have about the details, about how the Prophet felt ﷺ, about how the companions felt. There's a lot recorded on it. And the reason why it makes sense, because what we'll do is before we discuss the end, we'll go back a bit and summarize some of the key points in his life. Because Sa'ad ibn Muadh, he's not an ordinary figure. He's actually quite different. He's one of the 5 first key members to accept Islam in Medina, and he's one of the 5 most influential figures, if you'd like. That through them, Islam spreads, through them, Medina becomes strong, through them, at difficult stances, as we'll see, the Prophet ﷺ, he receives that support that he's looking for. And so, his name is Sa'ad ibn Muadh ibn al-Nu'man. And he was from the tribe of Banu Abd al-Ashhal. Tribe of Banu Abd al-Ashhal. This is a clan from within the Aus. So the clan named Banu Abd al-Ashhal, the sons of Abd al-Ashhal literally, he was from them. Now if you go back, and it'll make sense now, all the way to the first days in Medina, who remembers who was the first person sent to teach the Muslims Islam? Who remembers? Someone? Anyone? Go ahead. Mus'ab bin Umair, yes, very good. Mus'ab bin Umair is the first one, along with one other person who was sent to teach Islam. Abdullah ibn Maktoum, yes. Both of them were sent by the Prophet ﷺ. They're the first imams, first da'is, first people who are sent to teach the people. Abdullah ibn Maktoum and Mus'ab bin Umair. Now this is where Medina's new, there's only a handful of Muslims. And Mus'ab and Abdullah ibn Maktoum, they're busy in teaching the people. One day, As'ad ibn Zurara, who was, you can say, the most senior Ansari who had welcomed the Muslims and accepted Islam, he was sitting with them and he said, look, there's an opportunity in 2 men. There's an opportunity in 2 men that if you can convince these 2 men to accept Islam, Islam will enter into Medina. And he said these men are Usayd ibn Hudayr and Sa'ad ibn Muadh. And it so happened that as Mus'ab begins to teach, Abdullah bin Maktoum begins to teach, many of the Ansar, they're irritated. They're annoyed. Like, why are these people coming here? They're teaching us. They're making our people convert. So they decide amongst themselves that we need to go and we need to speak to As'ad. And As'ad is from amongst us. He's from Medina, so we can convince him, like, look, what's the need for this? Why are you here? This is problematic. These people need to go. And so they convince, they're talking to each other, and Sa'ad convinces Usayd, saying that, look, As'ad, he's my relative. Because As'ad is the son of my khala, meaning my maternal aunt, my mom's sister, is my cousin. So I don't want things to get bad between the both of us because we're family, it'll cause problems. So why don't you go, because he's not your relative, so you go and talk. Usayd says, fine, I'll go. And so he goes, and the people are like, that's it, Usayd's going to shut this down. He goes and he walks straight in and he says, As'ad, listen to me. I'm not here to play around. You tell me, why are these people here teaching us a religion that we don't want? We don't want to hear this. And so Mus'ab, radiallahu anhu, he was young, but the Prophet ﷺ had sent him for a reason. He was extremely wise, mature beyond his years. Some people, they're young in age, but they have a lot of maturity, a lot of wisdom. And so Mus'ab said, you know what, you have a point. You have a point. Because if what I'm saying doesn't make sense, if it's really bothering you, I'll leave. But you are the leader of your people, so you ought to give us some time to sit and listen with us. All right? It's only fair. Listen, and if you like what you hear, then that's fine, accept it. And if you don't, we'll leave you alone. He said, you know what, that's fair, that's fair. Ibn Ishaq says, فَرَكَزَ حَرْبَتَ. So he took the spear that he was holding and he put it down in the ground. He said, talk to me, tell me. And Mus'ab began to tell him about Islam. He gave him the summary of Islam. He recited some Quran. And as he sat there, Usayd was slowly and slowly convinced. As'ad says that before Usayd said anything, I knew he was going to accept Islam because his face was changing. And I could tell that he was affected. And whatever form of idolatry they were on, Usayd, this was making more sense to him, naturally, because it's Islam. So he said, Usayd says, you know what you've said is good and well. But how do I become from amongst these people that you guys are? He said, get up, wash yourself, clean yourself, read the Shahada, say Allah is one and His Messenger ﷺ is Muhammad, and that's it, you're a Muslim. He said, okay, fine. He accepted Islam. But, that's only part of the problem, because Sa'ad is the more dominant leader. So he's accepted Islam, but what is he going to say? You were sent to convince them to leave. You're coming back a Muslim. So he goes back and he says to Sa'ad, he says, look, I went to them and I talked to them. But the problem is that what he said to me made sense to me. And Sa'ad said, I knew it. I saw the way that you're coming back. You came back different than when you went. And we sent you for something, you came back with something else. Almost like, he said, La abalak, like you've literally, it literally translates to, may there be no father for you. May you lose your father because of what you've done. He's so upset at him. La abalak. And he said, but listen, because he needs to get Sa'ad close enough to listen, because Sa'ad doesn't want to be close enough to listen. Sometimes you stay away from the actual thing that you're supposed to hear, thinking about it instead of hearing it out. And that stops you from changing your mind, because you just won't go there. Sa'ad says, I don't want to go there. He says, no, you need to go there. Because the Banu Haritha, they've learned about me accepting Islam, they're threatening that same cousin of yours, As'ad. He's being threatened by them. You don't want your cousin to be hurt because of me, so go there. He said, really, the Banu Haritha, they're threatening As'ad ibn Zurara? He said, yes. He said, so he took his spear and he said, I'll see to it. And so he got there. And when he got there, he found that there's nothing going on. And that was just Usayd's way of getting him in there somehow. And now that he came, he said the same thing. Same conversation goes back and forth. Mus'ab says, why don't you listen? Maybe if you listen, you'll like what you hear. If you like what you hear, you accept it. And if you don't like what you hear, you're free to leave. So he said, okay, I'll sit and I'll listen. And so he sits and he listens. And he's amazed. He's blown by Surah Al-Zukhruf. A very beautiful ayat at the beginning if you read, Hamim wal-Kitab al-Mubin, full of so much speech about Allah Azza wa Jal's magnificence in His creation, the miraculous nature of how He's made things. And he's so affected, he accepts Islam. But this is the difference between a leader. He accepts Islam and he goes back and he says, listen to me, people of Banu Abdul Ashhal. If you do not accept Islam, the men and the women, I'm talking to all of you, if you don't accept Islam, then know that your leader Sa'ad is not talking to you. Now this looks like force, because by the way, Islam can't be accepted by force. The Prophet ﷺ himself shows it. You can't force somebody to convert to Islam. But this is actually not force. This is being persuasive. When you know you have influence, you use influence in a good way. Just as if you know something very important, you come home, your family's there, and you're like, I won't listen to anyone. I'm not going to talk to anyone if you don't take care of this. Not because you're trying to manipulate them, but because you're being persuasive, because you know something that they don't know yet. So obviously once he says that, they're going to say, well, what's Islam? Let's find out. Our leader doesn't want us to talk to him. What's Islam? And naturally, once they're exposed and they'll actually learn Islam, it'll make sense to them. And so when they all started to find out, they said, okay, let's go, let's learn about Islam. The entire clan of Banu Abd al-Ashhal became Muslims. This was the first house Ibn Ishaq says, that the whole clan becomes Muslim. Now, the beauty in this, the reason why we're going back to this is because that's a leader, an influencer, right? You have these social media influencers who, through their ads, companies are now putting in more money, paying influencers, sending them products, rather than running ads because it's so powerful. Influencer goes on their story, they talk about what a wonderful product it is, it's changed my life, and boom, the followers are like, I need to get this. Because that's using your influence for something. Only difference is, Sa'ad is using his influence for good. He's powerful, but he's using it for good. And so the entirety of the clan becomes Muslim. And from there it starts. He leads his people at every turn. And that's the beginning of it. I'll skip through the instances because we've already covered them, but I'll only pick one and then we'll come to his death. The instance where he shines the most, because a leader really shines when it's tough. When it's the toughest, nobody can stand up, that's when a leader shines. Abdullah bin Mas'ud says, radiallahu anh, it was on the day of Badr. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he needs the permission of the Ansar to go out and fight. Because the Ansar had not signed up for this. It was not part of their treaty, it was not part of their allegiance. It was something outside of that. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, Ashiru alayya ayyuhan nas, people, tell me what I should do regarding the caravan of Quraysh. People are telling him Abu Bakr stands, Umar stands, Miqdad stands, but the Prophet ﷺ, he's quiet. And so Sa'ad is the first one to understand that everyone that's standing up is a muhajir. But I need to stand up because someone has to stand from the Ansar. He wants to know about us. So he said, Ya Rasulullah, do you mean us, the Ansar? The Prophet said, yes, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Sa'ad says, I can't speak for the Khazraj, but I can speak for my people, the Aus. And I'll tell you, Ya Rasulullah, Inna qad amanna bik, wa saddaqnak, wa shahidna anna ma ji'ta bihi huwa al-haq, wa a'taynaka ala dhalika uhudana wa mawathiqana. Ya Rasulullah, we've believed in you. We've testified that you've come with the truth. We've given our word and our pact in regards to this, على السمع والطاعة, that we'll hear and we'll obey. فَامْضِ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ لِمَا أَرَدْتَ فَنَحْنُ مَعَكَ. Ya Rasulullah, you go and we're with you. There's nothing that you have to worry about. فَوَالَّذِي بَعَثَكَ بِالْحَقِّ, because I swear by the one that sent you with the truth. لَوْ اسْتَعْرَضْتَ بِنَا هَذَا الْبَحْرَ فَخُطَّهُ لَخُضْنَاهُ مَعَكَ. That if you take us down all the way until we hit the ocean, and then you say we're going in the ocean, we're ready to go in with you. مَا تَخَلَّفَ مِنَّا رَجُلٌ وَاحِدٌ. I can say about my men, not a single man will stay behind. وَمَا نَكَرْهُ أَن تَلْقَى بِنَا عَدُوَّنَا. We don't mind facing our enemy. Don't worry about us not showing up on the day. إِنَّا لَصُبُرٌ فِي الْحَرْبِ إِنَّا لَصُبُرٌ فِي الْحَرْبِ صُدُقٌ فِي اللِّقَاءِ. Because we are a people who are patient in fighting and we're vicious when we meet our enemy. We're patient, we'll stand when we're getting hit, we'll fight and we'll fight viciously. And the Prophet ﷺ was so relieved from this because he thought the Ansar would not sign on because they did not have to fight outside of Medina. Their allegiance was if someone comes to Medina. But at that point, Sa'ad is bringing up his people. It's not about the technicalities of what you have to do. It's about the fact that, Ya Rasulullah, we're with you. We're here to support. And so, the rest is history. What happens at Badr happens. This shows, again, the leader is the one at the most difficult time, boosts the morale of the people, speaks up for the Ansar. And he was the first to understand, and he was the first to lead his people. So you can see how Sa'ad ibn Muadh, how influential he's been. The first clan to accept Islam in its entirety through Sa'ad. This extremely critical moment at Badr happens through him. And so during the battle of Ahzab, which we just completed, we go back to pick this part out, Aisha radiallahu anha, she says that on the day of Ahzab, I saw Sa'ad, and his mother was with us in our fort. And I saw him, and he had protection. He was wearing his armor, but it only covered his chest. And his arms were bare. So I said to his mother, what do you think? Shouldn't he cover his arms too? Just out of concern, I said that to her. And she said, lo and behold, when he was fighting a man by the name of Ibn al-Ariqa, he shot an arrow and it hit his arm. In particular, فَقَطَعُوا أَبْجَلَ. This was a vein, one of the main veins in a person's forearm. And it pierced through, the arrow pierced through into his arm. And it ended up severely wounding him to the point that he was cauterized multiple times, and then it would swell and infect. And then they try to cauterize him again, it'd swell, and it would be like that. And Sa'ad would realize that his arm could be the reason for him to lose his life. And so he made this dua and he said, Allahumma la tukhrij nafsi hatta tuqirra ayni min bani Qurayza. And in one narration he said, Oh Allah, do not let me leave this world if there's unfinished business with the Quraysh. Because he wants to see the day that the Prophet of Allah ﷺ is relieved. It's all finished. فَإِن بَقِيَ مِنَ الْحَرْبِ شَيْءٍ. If there's left something of significance from war, then let me stay because I want to be of those that assist Allah's Messenger ﷺ. And in this narration, he said about the Banu Qurayza, because they had betrayed the Muslims and turned on them completely, he said, Ya Rasulullah, and he's making dua to Allah, oh Allah, let me see what happens to Banu Qurayza, so they get what they deserve because of their betrayal. And so, what happens. The Prophet ﷺ, if you remember, the one who he told the Aus, because they pleaded about the Banu Qurayza, let your leader Sa'ad decide. He'll decide and he'll rule. And Sa'ad gave the ruling that the warriors should be executed for their betrayal, the women and the children should be let go and alive, and we covered that in detail. And the Prophet ﷺ said that Sa'ad has ruled with the hukum of Allah. It's what Allah had wanted. And so after this had been completed, Aisha radiallahu anha, she says, as Ibn Sa'ad reports in his Tabaqat, that Sa'ad was transferred to the house of a woman named Rufayda, because after Banu Qurayza is over, he's so injured, it's only a matter of days. And Rufayda was a woman that was known specifically for treating those that were wounded. And the Prophet ﷺ would enter upon him. He'd come in the morning and he'd say, Kayfa asbahta? How are you doing in the morning? And then Kayfa amsayta, checking up on him in between morning and evening, how he's doing. And she said that one night things got really bad. And so they took him from Rufayda, our equivalent of when you're in the hospital and the doctors say, that's it, there's nothing left, you might as well take your loved one home, let them be with family because there's nothing that we can do. So they said that, and the Banu Abd al-Ashhal, they took them at night. The Prophet ﷺ finds out. And he finds out via Jibreel. Jibreel alayhi salam, he comes and he says, Ya Rasulullah, Man hadha al-abdu salih? Who is this righteous man that is passing away because the doors of the heavens are being opened? وَتَحَرَّكَ لَهُ الْعَرْشِ, that the arsh is shaking from this man. Who is this man? And the Prophet ﷺ realized it's Sa'ad ibn Muadh. It's him. And so he rushes. Jabir says, the Prophet ﷺ was walking so fast, حَتَّى تَقَطَّعَتْ شُسُوعُ نِعَالِنَا وَسَقَطَتْ أَرْدِيَتُنَا عَنْ أَعْنَاقِنَا. He said we were tripping in our shoelaces. We couldn't tie our shoes because of how fast he was going. And our shawls that we'd keep on our shoulders would fall off because of how fast he's going. So we complained and we said, Ya Rasulullah, أَتَعَبْتَنَا فِي الْمَشِي. You're walking so fast. And he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن تَسْبِقَنَا الْمَلَائِكَةُ إِلَيْهِ فَتَغْسِلُهُ كَمَا غَسَلَتْ حَنْظَلَةً. That I'm afraid that I'll miss the ghusl of Sa'ad the way that we missed it with Hamzah. If you remember at Uhud, Hamzah was washed by the angels. So the way Hamzah was missed by me, I didn't get a chance to wash him. I'm afraid this might happen with him. And the Prophet ﷺ, he reaches there and he sees that his mother is crying. And so he says, وَيْلَ أُمِّ سَعْدٍ سَعْدًا. She says, وَيْلَ أُمِّ سَعْدٍ سَعْدًا. She's crying and she's wailing. And the Prophet of Allah ﷺ, what does he say? He says, كُلُّ نَائِحَةٍ تَكْذِبُ إِلَّا أُمُّ سَعْدٍ. Every crying, wailing woman has lied except for Sa'd. Meaning if anyone has that right, or if anyone has the moment to cry, she really deserves to cry because of what her son has done. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he took his head, he put it in his lap, and he said, Allahumma inna Sa'dan qad jahada fi sabilik. Oh Allah, Sa'd has struggled in your path. Wa saddaqa rusulak. He has affirmed, he's believed in your messengers. Wa qada alladhi alayhi. He's fulfilled the duty that he's done. So 3 things Sa'd has done. Jahada fi sabilik. These are the highlight qualities of Sa'd's life. Jahada fi sabilik. He struggled in your path. Saddaqa rusulak. He's believed. He's been firm on his faith. He's the first one all the time to affirm. وَقَضَى الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ. He's completed what he needed to do. Whatever he was assigned, he did it. فَقْبَلْ رُوحَهُ بِخَيْرِ مَا تَقَبَّلْتَ بِهِ الْأَرْوَاحِ. So take his soul the way you take the best of souls. And Ibn Umar says, as we were seeing Sa'd, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that 70,000, سَبْعُونَ أَلْفَ مَلَكٍ, 70,000 angels are here, they're holding on to him. Because some of them, munafiqun, they said, Sa'd was heavy, but he's very light, as if there's something wrong with him. And the Prophet said, it's the angels carrying him that you don't realize, that's why you feel that he's light. And naturally, Sa'd's mother's crying, and we find that the Prophet ﷺ, he's consoling her. And he says to his mother, أَلَا يَرْقَأُ دَمْعُكِ وَيَذْهَبُ حُزْنُكِ فَإِنَّ ابْنَكِ أَوَّلُ مَنْ ضَحِكَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ وَاهْتَزَّ لَهُ عَرْشُ الرَّحْمَنِ. What are you crying about? What are you crying about? And I'll tell you something that'll help you stop your crying and it'll take your grief away. Know that your son is the first whom Allah has smiled to. And he's the first that the arsh has shaken because of him. Now the scholars, they talk about the shaking of the arsh. Sometimes Allah Azza wa Jal, to show His love, sometimes it's out of anger, but sometimes it's out of love, Allah commands one of His mighty creations to shake. I mean, that's what we believe. Obviously, the how of it, science tells us how an earthquake happens, but we believe that Allah willed it to happen, so it happened. That's Allah's creation, and He willed for it to happen. So, for example, the Prophet is on the mountain of Uhud, and it shakes and it trembles. And the Prophet tells it to calm down. We believe part of that, that's a miracle given by Allah, and we believe in miracles. We've talked at length about explaining the logical necessity of miracles and why it's not illogical. Similarly here. But this is in the same vein as how the mountain of Uhud shakes and trembles. Allah's arsh shakes and trembles to let the angels know that something big has happened. Someone special has passed. And that was Sa'd. And he's carried away. Aisha radiallahu anha says the Prophet ﷺ, he sat himself watching him being buried. And as the Ansar were burying him, he said, and listen to this, he said that Sa'd was squeezed in his grave. And this is one of the evidences that everyone is squeezed in the grave. He said Sa'd was squeezed in his grave, but Allah, Inna Allah qad farraja an, but Allah relieved him. And so from here the scholars say that everyone is squeezed in their grave, that initial squeezing, kind of like that initial slight pull or pain when the soul leaves a person. Similarly, it happens in the grave. But if you're righteous, then the grave lets you go, to tell you that this was what would have happened if you were not righteous. But if you're not righteous, then what happens is at the grave, that grip that comes in, it then keeps on coming tighter and tighter until it makes you taste the punishment of the grave. We ask that Allah protect us. And so Aisha says, ما كان أحد أشد فقدا على المسلمين. Look at how the companions are feeling. She says, no one was tougher on the Muslims than Sa'ad because of everything he's done. And he's that personality that's loud, that's representing, that's at the forefront. You need people like that. And she said, I saw Abu Bakr and Umar both crying. And not only that, عرفت بكاء أبي بكر من بكاء عمر وعرفت بكاء عمر من بكاء أبي بكر. I could tell Umar's crying from Abu Bakr's crying. And I could tell Abu Bakr's crying from Umar's crying. Sometimes people cry and you can't tell. But when people are really moved and both people are crying profusely, you can tell who's crying because they're pouring everything out. And you can say, that person's crying. I can tell it's him. She says, I can tell Abu Bakr and Umar's crying apart from their voices because of how shaken they are. And the Prophet ﷺ, he buries Sa'ad and he's brought, someone brings a silk cloth for him a day or two after. And the companions are touching it and they're amazed. Kind of when you see something nice, you're playing around with it. And as they're يَعْجَبُونَ مِنْ لِينِهَا, as they're touching, they're like, it's so soft, it's so beautiful. He says, أَتَعْجَبُونَ مِنْ هَذِهِ. Are you amazed by this? Because the cloth that Sa'ad is getting in Jannah is softer and more beautiful. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ, he's so grieved, he's so hurt that he's still remembering Sa'ad. He's relating everything to Sa'ad. And that's why he passed away at the age of 37. 31, it's the 6th year after Hijrah. So 31, in 6 years of total, he's done all of this to earn this rank. And so what we learn if we kind of zoom out from Sa'ad's life is to use a person's influence for good. A person, if you have influence, you're able to convince, you have that authority that Allah has given you, you use it for good. 6 years. But in 6 years, Sa'ad earned the respect of Allah, Allah's Messenger ﷺ, that he's so hurt and grieved by this, he's so moved by this, and the reward and love of Allah Azza wa Jal that he's honored with this. And we end here. We ask that Allah Azza wa Jal allow us to be from those that benefit and take from the lessons of those like Sa'ad ibn Muadh. And inshaAllah we will continue with the incidents after Sa'ad ibn Muadh's death, inshaAllah, next week. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.